Well, is it good morning?
Good morning.
Good day, good afternoon, depending on when you're listening. Could be good evening, anytime. Hey, welcome to the Better Podcast. I'm Stephen Hermann.
I'm Kale
And
Flaspohler.
our guest today, Dr. Cliff Miller. Thank you for being on today.
My pleasure.
Appreciate
Thanks for having
it.
me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. So let's go through some highlights here. 2000 grad at University of Missouri Veterinary School, which were MIZ.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. ZOU.
Got some good sports going on right now. It's been a lot of fun.
Fun to watch.
It's great. Good time to be a Tiger.
Right on.
Started practice in 03.
Yes. By myself.
On a whim.
Yeah. There was a lot of late night chicken scratches, thinking about it, planning it, moving back to my hometown. You know, I'd worked on it mentally for a long time, just didn't know if it was going to come to fruition or not, and decided to pull the trigger. And I literally got the contractor and built the building with the notion that I for sure had one patient, that was my dog, and assumed that my parents would bring their animals to me. So I think, the first rendition of the building was 4,800 square feet, and I just said, let's do it.
And you're due north of us here.
Yes.
Yeah, the Green Hills Veterinary Clinic.
Yes, sir.
In Moberly.
In Moberly.
Yeah. So Randolph County, just the edge of Boone and Randolph, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah. We're all in the same neighborhood here, really. So.
Yeah, nice. I mean, there's enough crossover. I do mixed animals, so I'm traveling down this way sometimes when I'm mobile, and there's some things that people will drive from Columbia because we've built a relationship for too. So it's definitely neighbors.
It is. Yeah, we should be. Yeah, 4 veterinarians now.
Yep.
So it's gone from that one pet to needing 4 veterinarians. How's that journey been?
It's been really good growth. Like anything growing, I think there's growing pain sometimes, and for like your audience, understanding when you're hiring another vet, do you hire another vet? Can you justify hiring this technician? And those kinds of thoughts. There's been a lot of that over the years. But I built the building, I think, with the notion that it was probably a 2 to 3 person practice. We're tight with 4, but we need 4. So it's been really good growth. Actually, one of my former employees is in the boot heel now, and he just this last week was talking to me about how long did it take you to add that vet, and he was trying to decide could he justify something, and so I've been lucky enough, I think, partly because of being close to Columbia, I've been able to attract veterinarians and new grads, and maybe not had some of the struggles of our neighbors out of state to just find somebody. So we've been able to grow. When I've decided it's time, we've been able to do it.
Well, as we get through the list, it's probably you're with the MVMA, right? I mean, that's a big part of it. You're active in the community, so it's not a location, but it's being active.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't think my lifestyle would be complete without the extracurricular veterinary things I do, if you will. And MVMA. When I was a part of MVMA before I started the practice, but when I moved to Moberly, neighboring veterinarians said, hey, why don't you come to this meeting with me? Soon thereafter, I was involved in leadership in the local district and then blossomed and bloomed from there, I guess.
Real quick, everyone should know, but Missouri Veterinary Medical Association. Just want to throw that out there. Just want to Mo VMA, right? It's not Minnesota or Michigan or Missouri. So I think that's a big part. That when people are like having trouble hiring, it's like, well, how active are you out there in the community? I mean, your name's out there. You're doing things. People see that. It gives back. It's that law of attraction.
Well, for sure.
Yeah.
Knowing that, I think a clinic is a destination for new grads is probably something. Knowing that they've got, the buzzword everybody uses is mentorship, but there's reality to that. It's not just mentoring on how to do a spay. It's how do you make decisions about things in practice? How can you be a leader amongst your staff? I mean, there's lots of things to mentoring that I think is important too.
Yeah, it's not the skills teaching of the veterinary part itself. It's the life skills too that come along with being a veterinarian and living in the world. All those things that come together.
These gray hairs show that maybe I've had enough time to learn how some of the mistakes to make or not make or what have you.
That's how knowledge happens for sure. So that's great. So with the MVMA, you've been on the board. You're still on the board through the position of the legislative chairman, and we're excited to talk about that today.
Yeah, cool.
How'd you decide that legislative chairman was the
That's a great
spot
question.
to be?
Decided or got suckered in? I'm not sure.
Voluntold.
So it was when I was just a board member, as far as like a district representative. I think I found interest in that and got on the legislative committee, and that was probably 09-ish, I would guess. And then within a year from that, the former chairman had some health reasons and needed to step down, and I think that's where sucker was written across my forehead or something. And I said, yeah, I'd do it. But and I I joke about that, but honestly, I've truly enjoyed it. It's
Good.
I think I see the value in it for me personally, but kind of the whole give back to the profession. I'd like to think it's making a difference in how we do things in veterinary world and the animals of Missouri and all the other things that we touch on as far as in legislative issues.
Right. And people don't, I think, realize as much. We talk about it here, get it out there, but Julie Braun, the executive director, said that 70% of their job is government stuff.
A lot, yes.
70% of, I mean,
advocacy, dealing with not just legislation, but even rules making. Sometimes we'll get an emergency rule from the Department of Ag, and we look at that and make sure that that's, something that is good for our membership, good for the animals of Missouri, those kinds of things. So, yeah, it's a big part of the MVMA's role, I think.
Well, we looked at the list of legislative things out there. I think it's like,
I actually pulled up before I came in. I just put my tracking list on my phone in case you guys would say, well, what about such? There's dozens of bills that have some mention, whether it's business owners, it may have nothing to do with technically veterinary medicine, but what about if we change the tax laws and all of a sudden now sales tax, for example, is mandated on services.
Right.
That's a big deal to a small business owner.
Yes.
It would be
the client too that's
Yeah,
coming in for
absolutely.
$1,000 surgery. Now that
Now all of a
$1,000 could be
right.
another $100 on it.
right. The perception even of, well, gosh dang, my fees just went up. Well, no. Our charges are the same. You paid more.
Yeah.
That didn't mean we got it. Kind of
Right.
thing.
Right.
So there are bills that we track that, like I say, don't technically have to do with veterinary medicine, but certainly affect veterinarians like those. There are those that have to do with food safety. So this morning I was emailing a representative that asked me about industrial hemp in pet foods.
Okay.
So things like that you might not think about,
Right.
but they're still on our tracking list. And then the obvious are things that, rabies laws or how we practice veterinary medicine in one way or the other. Looking at our Practice Act. We've had over the years countless examples of someone wanting a piece of the pie, if you will. If they wanted to carve out this niche and say, well, non-veterinarians should be able to do this. Okay,
Right.
well, for one thing, is that really in the best interest of the animal? Is that in the best interest of the general public?
Right.
Do you want a non-trained person doing it, or you want a trained professional? And then obviously, from the standpoint of the MVMA, we have to protect the members, so is it going to affect veterinarians and their ability to earn a living and stuff like that?
Yeah. We're looking forward to getting into all that for sure.
Okay.
I'd be remiss, though, real quick, if I didn't talk about family. Happily married.
Yes.
3 kids.
3 boys, yep.
18.
18, 15, and 12. So we're in the throes of going every which direction. So
Yeah, you are. You're coaching baseball?
I'm coaching my youngest son's baseball team in my whatever free time that may be. But
Yeah.
I actually plan specifically on, practice these nights, and that way I cut off appointments beforehand, and I know I'm getting away and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I really enjoy that. Enjoy sports with the kids, but baseball and football are my passions then.
Good. And you got a cattle operation with your dad.
Right.
So you got that on top of
Yeah.
that going on.
I'm a bunch of mama cows right now. And yes, for some reason, they're need the most attention and work when we're also the busiest at work. So that's probably not a real good formula, but that's something else. I
Balance it all, though. Exactly. So, yeah. No, a lot of great things going on in life there. Family first, right? Mm-hmm. And you've got a great practice going on and time for advocacy, which in the industry that you're in, it's one of the most important things to be is involved. Otherwise, someone else is going to make decisions for you.
Absolutely. We as that's why I think it's important for veterinarians, even if you're not as involved as me, is make sure you're aware and make sure you're a member. You support the organization because if we're not the ones helping make the decision, someone else will. Nope. And we need to be we need to be the experts. We need to be there telling decision makers why this is good or bad, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Kale, I cut you off earlier.
Oh yeah, no, I liked where you're going, and I guess just one of my questions from the outside looking in is, so when these pieces of legislation are being considered by folks in Jeff City and things like that, are they calling you and asking you like, hey, what's the veterinary perspective of this?
Occasionally.
Yeah.
I mean, we would sure love that to be the go-to.
Yeah.
The rule I'd say it's the exception rather than the rule more often than not. What I will say is from our experiences when I go to Jeff City or when we have Veterinary Day at the Capitol, for example, I do believe they all truly want to hear from the expert. As a legislator, they're getting birds are chirping from every angle in both ears, and so there's a lot of information, and for them to make a really truly informed decision, I think they do appreciate and want to hear from us. And there are times, I think it could be perceived as special interest if it's the veterinarians talking about a veterinary issue, but yet we're the ones in the trenches. So occasionally they'll reach out directly. I mean, we've got our legislative consultants, aka lobbyists, and they've got a good relationship with those folks. So they'll certainly seek their input, and they can then decide, do we refer that on to the veterinarian, to us? Is it something we've talked about 100 times and they already kind of know where we're at with it? So a little bit of a mixed bag on whether they reach out to us or not. There's times that like local municipalities have made decisions and we sure wish, or we find out later that you didn't have a veterinarian in the room for that discussion. And so that's one of the beauties, I think, of state government is there has to be this open public forum and discussion and debate and so on. So that allows us to weigh in when there's maybe a controversy or what have you.
So your job there, it's not only looking at what's getting introduced by someone else, it's also introducing?
Sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, we don't do that regularly, but there are definitely times that we say, hey, here's a missing piece. Here's something that needs to be addressed.
Right.
And what we have to grapple with and make decisions is the whole, what we've always called opening the Practice Act. So Missouri Chapter 340 is basically what governs our day-to-day lives.
And then the dot,
Yes, exactly right.
After.
So 340 something. And if we introduce legislation that would affect 340, what we have to weigh is the fact that someone else that doesn't think like us could very well propose other changes too. Yes. So the old 11th hour amendments kind of thing, that one word change and one, we've actually introduced things in the past that we thought we almost had it across the finish line, and one little amendment or one sentence in that amendment, all of a sudden we look at and say, this could have unintended consequences. This could actually make this matter worse if we allow it to move through. And so we've had to pull the rug from under ourselves if there's some language that just is not palatable to us.
So is that get stuck in committee, or it's actually been on the floor?
Literally going
to vote on the floor.
On the amendment, going to the floor,
okay.
And speaking, and that's been my challenge sometimes, is speaking for the veterinary community. If I'm the one on the phone and the vote's in 10 minutes, you can't send out a mass email and get everyone's opinion kind of thing. Oh. So usually it's a little more time to prepare, a little more thought process. Everyone's getting buy-in, but every once in a while there's all right, we have to know now kind of thing.
So yeah, the way the sausage is made, right? Committee happens, and so can we talk about how that process works? A little bit?
So you can pre-file bills. So in a legislative session that starts January 1 or first business day thereafter type thing, pre-files happen in the fall. So December 1 opens up, or there's discussion even in the fall, and then opens up December 1. So those bills we have knowledge about before we can discuss. Obviously, they can be introduced also during session, so they get assigned a committee. And it's possible that a bill never gets assigned to committee. It may just die of its own weight, that it never sees the light of day. Interestingly enough, in the House and the Senate, those bills are assigned differently too. So in the House, they assign to a committee, and then the committee chair decides when to bring them forward. In the Senate, they're brought forward in the order with which they were introduced. So Senate Bill 1 will get a hearing before Senate Bill 2.
Okay.
And so that's even a dynamic you have to kind of deal with and know, is this going to happen? As a general rule, we've learned, so bills get read, and then they get read a second time, and then they get a committee hearing on, or should get a committee hearing. Some don't.
Yeah.
And after approval through committee, then they go in for House vote or Senate vote. If they pass that, then they go to the other chamber. And that's something, a few years ago, we had one that, we really finally got it across the line in the Senate. That was our big hurdle, because before it had passed in the House the year before, it got so late approval in the Senate that it never got on the House floor. Session ended kind of thing. So that's the dynamics of what you deal with, like scheduling, and they have priorities. They've got mandates on budget. They have to, constitutionally, they must approve the budget. Okay, so so sometimes all of a sudden for 2 weeks, that's the only thing talked about. So I don't know if I've completely answered your question.
Well, no, I think I think a lot of people probably don't understand how those bills actually get to the floor, and then even on the floor, if they come out of the House and make it to the Senate, or reverse, right? The Senate could vote on it, and then it has to go to the House,
and it may
and then
never.
they can throw amendments in them, but the House does that. It's got to go back to the Senate because it wasn't what the Senate
exactly right
originally voted on. It's changed now.
Yeah.
So and then they could, it could literally do a circle and never
get there just because there's enough.
It's the governor's desk,
yes,
right?
Exactly, and that's really ultimately, to kind of finish that thought, before something ever truly becomes law, it has to be fully agreed upon by both chambers in the same language before session ends, and then go to the governor's desk. Yeah. And then the governor can sign it. If the governor signs it, obviously it's law. The governor can veto it. If the governor vetoes it, it actually can theoretically go back for veto session that they have in late summer. That takes 2/3 vote to override the governor's signature or not. And so it's not an easy task to get things done, and that's somewhat purposeful. It shouldn't be. You need to make sure, and that's something we look at a lot. What are unintended consequences? If this sounds like a good idea, great. What about X, Y, and Z that could potentially domino effect if this happens? So, it is kind of necessary to have all those hurdles to make sure that there aren't consequences we don't want.
Right. No, it's a big deal because there's always going to be unintended consequences even afterwards, right? And that's why legislation happens again to fix what just happened. Exactly. Because there's no way amongst the many veterinarians in the state, the many clients in the state, the many animals in the state, that
100%
it's gonna be right for everybody.
Good example. Number of years ago, and really that topic now is like ballot initiatives. The way back when the puppy mill bill, that passed, but yet there were so many nuances and details that then the next couple legislative sessions had to be fine-tuned. Yes, the general public wanted this in regards to limiting puppy mills, but yet, there was language, for example, about unfettered access to water. Well, in some situations, a dog shouldn't have water 24/7, 365. Okay,
Yeah.
so we had to kind of work on that. And while this good premise of making sure everything had water made sense, the veterinarian could understand that there are times where we need to have an ability to alter that sometimes too.
My dogs sleep in a kennel at night.
Right.
They don't have access.
So if you had X number of dogs and were technically commercial breeder, you could have gotten in trouble if you put them in that kennel without the water overnight.
Yeah, okay.
And we know that's not real. That's not how it should be. But that's what we had to work on. Those kinds of things.
Yeah, yeah. That's the voice of they need the legislators need your voice though.
Right.
I've seen that I've had some friends, need some legislators, and called them up, and I've asked them about in the committee, and they go, "That's in there," and I go, "Yeah, that's in there," because there's
They're bombarded with information.
they cannot read all that, and they're relying on lobbyists and for legislative chairmen for associations to inform them.
Yep.
And so the Missouri Veterinary Medical Association, it's a strong association with a strong voice. It's important.
I do think we're pretty blessed in Missouri to have a good voice in Jeff City. I think they genuinely trust and appreciate our opinion. I think we also are blessed to have good relationship with our veterinary licensing board. There are some states that aren't so lucky, and for whatever reason, those veterinarians are butting heads. Whereas I think we tend to hopefully look at the common goal, common good. The association understands that the board's role and job is to protect the public. It's not technically to protect veterinarians, but yet veterinarians with good ethics are the ones that are hopefully driving the voice and making sure what it looks like to protect the public and protect those animals.
Yeah, absolutely. Kale, what you got?
Well, I guess
you were itching over there. I've been talking the whole time.
no, it's okay. So I guess my main thing that I want to get out of these is what is it about your time in this role that you might be most proud of? And I'm sure there's a lot of impactful things that you've done over time, but is there anything that comes to the surface?
There's a few that jump to mind. Probably a couple of them that people don't even realize that MVMA was involved in or that it was an issue. The first one that pops in my head would be statute of limitations. When I started this gig with the legislative committee, the veterinary community was very, we were underserved, or what's the right word? We were
Underrepresented?
we had the short end of the stick.
Okay.
We drew the short straw years ago when they did statute of limitations, in that we could be sued for up to 7 years after an incident. Human medicine was 2 years. And that always just boggled my mind that was ever even a thing. How did that language ever happen?
Yeah.
But yet it did, and there really wasn't a lot of motivation for legislators to put a lot of effort in it because it wasn't a huge issue. It was a huge issue for somebody that got sued, but for the general population, that wasn't a big thing. And as you can imagine, the trial attorneys really didn't like the idea of shortening anything. So they had a pretty strong voice.
Paid by the hour or by the minute, actually.
Yeah, they had a pretty strong voice in Jeff City, and if it came up, tended to kind of shove it aside. But we were able to, after years of work, we were able to get a bill passed that put us on even playing field. Statute of limitations for a veterinarian is now also 2 years, just like in human medicine. And I'll not get my dates correct, but I have the bill signed by when Crichton signed it. So I remember that's
cool.
Whenever he was governor was when we got that accomplished.
That's cool.
So that was a big deal, and I do think it affects veterinarians perhaps without them knowing it. It probably affects their malpractice insurance rates. It for the small business owner, it sure should provide some peace of mind. Probably the other biggie that technically wasn't, the old bill marching up Capitol Hill. It wasn't exactly the traditional thing you think about legislatively, but compounding drug rules. After, again, years of work on that, for forever and a day prior, compounding drugs or compounded drugs could not be ordered in to a clinic under just the clinic name. Okay, so if we're ordering a bottle of cephalexin from the distributor, we don't have to say this cephalexin is for these patients. We just order a bottle and then we prescribe it out appropriately. For compounded drugs, that wasn't allowed. So every veterinarian, whether they want to admit it publicly or not, had, their pet was prescribed umpteen hundred different, had all the ailments in the world, because we would have to order it under our pet's name so that then we could distribute to a different pet. Okay. And while that happened, and luckily seldom was that a legal red flag to somebody, it was putting us at risk, and it was a potential thing to get in trouble. And so we worked with not just the veterinary community, but we actually had to work with Board of Pharmacy too. So we had several players involved there, and we were able to get the compounding laws changed in Missouri. And then, of course, you have to work with those compounding pharmacies if they're out of state to make sure they have those updated rules. But now we can order stock bottle. So if VetMedin, for example, which is pimobendin, goes on back order like it did for several years, we now could get a bottle of pimobendin compounded, have it on our shelf, and then if Fluffy came in congestive heart failure, we could prescribe a week's worth of that drug without having to wait a week on it being shipped from the compounding pharmacy. So it's a real game changer as far as making sure you're staying in compliance with the law, but ultimately, again, helping the animal, because we hopefully have something at our fingertips to use today and not wait for, ordering and delivery and all those things that we had previously.
Absolutely.
So those are two big wins. I know I could add to that, but you said the most proud. Those are probably the two that really hit home for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's phenomenal that you were able to get those across the finish line and something you're passionate about, and to be able to continue to work on those things. Is there anything else that maybe the MVMA does that you feel like the general public may not know that they should be aware of?
Yeah, great example. Or great question. There's several examples. I think if you ask the average veterinarian just across the state, and they're probably going to go to convention and talk about CE, and I'd say CE is a small part of that. Advocacy is a biggie. We, in Jeff City, even dealing with rules, not just legislation, statewide rules and health regulations, public relations. So we've got an arm of the MVMA that deals with public perception. So go back to the puppy mill thing, for example. When that was a really hot topic and was on the ballot, the MVMA did a lot of work to help people understand, what is a good breeder, and it is okay to breed dogs. We want to make sure that it's done ethically and that they're cared for and those kinds of things. So public relations, we've got the equine committee that looks at all kinds of state regulations, equine health. We've got the Missouri Stocker Feeder Assurance Program. So that is a cattle health certification program, started years ago, probably 20, 25 plus probably. For sure 25 plus, because it was around when I was, starting. So, and that's a way to say, here's this ear tag in this calf, and everybody in a sale barn knows that it's got this ear tag. That means some veterinarian has signed off that it's had this amount, it's had these vaccines, it's been weaned, it's got this background with these health status. So that's an arm of the MVMA that probably, a good chunk of people wouldn't know about. Mm-hmm. I probably feel like I'm rambling. There's a long list.
Oh, you're
of things
good.
Yeah.
Long list of things that the MVMA does. A big component of that, I think, is some of the legislative stuff that probably gets taken for granted somewhat.
What's out there right now that would be interesting to people?
Yeah, a couple things that come to mind. I mentioned the email about the industrial hemp. that's something that I basically had to say that we flat out don't know. Let's not pass some legislation until we know what safety would be.
Yeah.
We voiced some concerns
So
about
that was in food, hemp.
well,
and-
industrial
Yeah.
hemp would be allowed in animal feed, and
Okay.
the original version of it said it would be allowed in food-producing animals. Okay, well, there's the concern of the animal, but also what about the end user? What about the human that's eating said animal? And it may be perfectly safe.
What is industrial hemp?
It's a byproduct of it's the fiber source in
It's
CBD and
leftover
Yep.
stuff.
Well, I was, there's wild hemp
Yep.
out there as well. I was curious if it had something to do with that.
It's
and hay
commercially
and,
commercially grown.
Okay.
And it makes sense that it would be a fiber source and so on for livestock. But the example I cited to one of the committee members that I talked to, one of the representatives, is grain-free diets. Grain-free diets you see advertised all over the place for pet foods. Well, it wasn't until grain-free diets were really marketed and pushed and became popularized that we realized that it's a higher incidence of dilated cardiomyopathies in animals that ate grain-free diets. So something that we didn't know about was a health concern to that dog eating it, but it was already out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the worry would be hemp may be perfectly fine, but we don't have the data. So that's what I had to tell them as from the MVMA standpoint is we don't know yet. This may be a great thing, but it could have really bad consequences that we don't understand yet. So we couldn't support that legislation. That's a current one. Actually has committee vote next week. So we'll know about that soon. Another biggie is we call preemption bill. It's basically saying that local municipalities can't carve out little niches of what is and is not veterinary medicine. And it's not just veterinary medicine. That bill actually includes lots of health-related professions, from dentistry to chiropractic to podiatry to so on. All these different subsections within state statute says that somebody like the city of Columbia, I'll say that because we're sitting in it, can't say, well, veterinarians in Columbia can't, or non-veterinarians in Columbia could spay a dog. Okay, believe it or not, we've seen that kind of stuff. When I first started legislative committee years ago, there was a bill that said spaying and neutering wasn't veterinary medicine. Well, what is it? That was kind of the argument is what happened. So are you just going to hold them down and spay it if you decide you want to do it? Because you have to have drugs to do that. To have drugs, you have to have these licenses. So there were lots of problems with that bill, but the current one is basically saying that we don't want local municipalities to decide. It should be state, just like we talked about, a robust conversation, debate, so on, get expert testimony, make it a statewide and have the experts helping decide what it is.
That local community on that, it's not like the school board or the local school from what you talk about.
This would be that it would be a city council or a county commission or something would help decide what rules are. And for full disclosure, this came about because the city of St. Louis the declaw ban.
Declaw, yes.
Yeah, and we didn't want, MVMA, myself, we don't want to get into a declaw debate. There will be veterinarians listening that fully support declaws, and there will be those that think it's terrible, and there's all the mix in between. Mm-hmm. But we don't believe a local municipality should making decisions on veterinary medicine. It should be the veterinary community. It should even veterinarians in St. Louis that do not like declaws still didn't want regulation to say that myself, my client, can't have this discussion and decide what's best for that patient. So that's where why we're involved in this from the statewide standpoint.
If I can segue on this here, Colorado. Mm-hmm. It's interesting to think about this. Even like putting to the voters to get to vote on how veterinary care happens. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of the same kind of thing to go when the majority of the veterinary doctor community, the AVMA, everybody said no, like don't do this. But everyone over here voted for it They voted for taking the right thing, access to veterinary care, right? Or not veterinary, access to pet care. I shouldn't say veterinary care, it's access to pet care. So the people that voted think they're voting for the right thing, but how can you be educated enough to vote on that?
Great example, perfect example. And if you look at polls and trends of those voters, it became very close. When that topic first came out in Colorado, it was an absolute landslide, no-brainer. Everybody and their brother was going to vote for increasing care, especially in shelter situations and so on. And it was the way it was written, if you didn't have a full understanding of the topic, it seemed like a no-brainer. But a good example of what advocacy did is AVMA, the Colorado VMA, a laundry list of allied professions, even the Technicians Association was like, this isn't a good idea. They got it to within a few percentage points of failing.
Yes,
So
it was close.
It was a very close vote. So that's, part of what the associations do is public education and advocacy. But to your point, without a full understanding of an issue, things can go very differently.
Yeah, especially that one because where do we vote on? I don't want to. To say in the human medical profession that we vote on someone to be a medical professional, right? Essentially, the same kind of thing to say like, let's just create a whole new role for human medicine.
Really put the cart before the horse too. We
did.
had no regulatory body. We didn't yet have parameters on what was and wasn't allowed. They kind of had this idea of a curriculum.
Yeah.
But it's forced a lot of things, upon them to hurry up and make a decision. Like, what do you even do about controlled drug laws?
Right.
Whose license is on the line if you do X, Y, or Z?
Right.
And that's part of this is, looking at similar type issues within Missouri or other states is somewhere someone is liable for something. Okay, so it ultimately comes on the veterinarian, and I don't know that I want to put my license at risk for an untrained professional.
No, you work too hard for that,
Right, exactly.
and it's your livelihood.
Right.
Yes. So no, I think that's interesting. Talk about nationally. There's not. Talk about national bills. Is there much national going on?
Yeah, probably the real biggie still right now in D.C. is xylazine regulation.
Okay.
If
Can I ask you? They're not really regulating the profession; they're regulating the pharmacy side, the prescription side of it,
the
more
drug
so.
itself.
The profession's more at the state level. Regulated for the care.
Well, yeah, I think that's accurate. Probably the day-to-day practice, the profession is on a state-by-state basis.
Talking about drug distribution.
Yeah,
over here.
so we get more involved with animal health regulation, like animal movements, health certificates, interstate commerce, as far as those animals crossing state lines. Certainly, food-producing animals, some of those health regulations. FDA, USDA drug regulations. That's covers all of us.
Yes.
But really, most rules that control our day-to-day lives, as far as how we practice, that's a state regulation rather than federal.
Okay. So xylazine at the federal level.
Yeah. So the biggie on the federal level is xylazine. It's a sedative drug we use in veterinary medicine every day. And has really gained momentum in street drugs as well. What we know is happening is it's being added or cut with fentanyl. It adds to the addictive component. It adds to the short-lived high. Even probably year plus ago, watched a 60 Minutes special on Trank, and it was in some of the Caribbean islands, and these poor people they looked like a tranquilized horse. They were just standing there, half falling over, half standing up, and spent their day like that. And as soon as they got off their high, they were looking for their next score with it. And so drug dealers are putting xylazine in, and unfortunately, A very, very small percentage potentially is coming through the veterinary community.
Okay.
Almost all of the drug is coming from overseas and in very different. It's not like veterinarians are dealing this, or it's not.
There's not a
like
bunch of
they're-
diversion going
No,
on.
it's diversion is a minuscule, if any, part.
You're
of
gonna
it.
get in trouble.
Right.
I mean, you're gonna lose your job, your business,
Yeah.
everything.
I mean, you
if
could
do that.
What's at risk is they're talking about making this a controlled drug, and from the veterinarian's day-to-day lives standpoint, if xylazine became a controlled drug nationally, then all the manufacturers of xylazine are being manufactured in a non-controlled drug facility. So instantaneously when that happens, production ends until they ramp up a approved facility. And we're talking years to get that kind of approval.
Yes.
State by state has actually, some of them have, speaking of what MVMA has done, state by state has, some of them have made emergency orders. 2 years ago, Ohio, Pennsylvania, another eastern state, governors signed emergency mandates making controlled drugs in those states. Well, that day one, MVMA, when we heard of that, wrote a letter to the governor, and Parsons was very understanding of what agriculture's like, and the fact that veterinarians are using this in their day-to-day lives and important for agriculture, and so we nipped that in the bud early on, but from the national standpoint, what they're working on is trying to make the consequences of diversion the same as if it's a controlled drug, but yet not technically have to deal with some of the regulatory component. So if you are caught, if you are a bad player, you're going to get in trouble as if you were dealing whatever, cocaine. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
But if you're doing what you're supposed to do, your life shouldn't change much.
Yeah. No, that makes sense because, the problem is that, hey, maybe it needs to be a controlled facility. Maybe. Let's just say maybe it does, right? But you have a pathway to that.
Right.
They didn't have a pathway to it.
Right,
They were just going to.
Right. So in the national language we've looked at, it basically will turn it into, but to your point, they don't have to change things within production and the facilities immediately to make that happen too. So
Is that a big challenge with government that it's literally like
This
when the
is-
bill gets signed, it's like, bam, there's no, how many bills have a pathway to adopt?
this one's been a labor of love by a lot. AVMA
Yeah.
has put a lot of effort into this. It's a rare bill that has a large number, not just a bill sponsor, it has a large number of both Republicans and Democrats as co-sponsors.
It's good.
And that's rare in D.C.
Very rare.
So
Very rare.
we're optimistic that it's going to happen. It sounds like it's got momentum. It's not really got pushback. I can't explain D.C. well enough to explain to you why it wouldn't just happen. But going back to our unintended consequences, I think there's a lot of boxes being checked to make sure that it's the right.
why it wouldn't happen. Amendments.
Right.
Someone slaps in something that has nothing to do with the bill and tries to sneak it through.
Right. And that's what the AVMA,
Trying to
they're
avoid.
pouring a lot of effort into.
Yeah, to not get
We're-
somebody to slap something in and try to sneak it through.
This
at the
summer
11th
is
hour. Okay.
what they call legislative fly-in in D.C. I'm planning to go to that. There's a
Good.
few of us from
Yeah, Dr. Stroop's going?
Yes, there's
Yeah.
a few of us from Missouri that will be there, and so that'll be a big topic. Lots of veterinarians from all around the country.
Conventions there at the same time, right?
Right.
Yeah. The AVMA convention, sorry. Yeah.
AVMA convention overlaps. I think the legislative day is the day that the convention starts, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. It's great. It's good to be involved.
Yes.
Have to be. So what more in Missouri? What else is going on that is important right now? Because there's a huge list, right? I think you said you even did some reviewing on the list. We looked through a list I don't know which one to talk about.
Well,
I really don't, because
what we do is, and that might be worth commenting on. How we decide is, I get our long list from our lobbyists that they've got programs to look. Does this does this have this keyword? Does this have this keyword? Those kinds of things. So I get the long list. And then I read through them all and say, okay, does this potentially affect us? Do we need to have an opinion? And then it goes before the committee. The committee forms an opinion. We actually have 5 categories that we've developed. One is actively support. So that means we're putting time, labor, love into this. One is support, meaning yes, we like it, but we're not maybe going to pound the pavement. We're not going to spend time and money on. Neutral, which I'll come back to neutral if that's okay.
Absolutely.
And then the inverse of those first two of actively oppose and oppose.
Okay.
Neutral is a...
So let me book in this. You got actively support, actively oppose. So you're doing things on both ends of that spectrum.
Exactly right.
You come one step left or right, however you want to say it. Yeah, I'm not going to... And then, the neutral, like, if you're on a hill and you put a neutral, you're going to slide backwards. Is that like what...
Well, neutral is one that we could be doing several things. We simply are watching it. We don't know if we need to have an opinion, but it's something we think we need to watch. Go back to the amendment. You change these words, you change this line, all of a sudden we may love it and hate it. Or there have been times, to be real frank, we've had a neutral opinion maybe because of public perception. And I'll make something up here, but if there's the word veterinarian and dog, and if veterinarians oppose something, and those that don't understand the topic hear that veterinarians don't like this idea, they're like, what the heck? Why wouldn't a veterinarian like this? But we know enough to say we can't really support it or oppose it because of public perception. So sometimes, to be fully transparent, we're working on something that we may not agree or we may agree with, but we don't want public perception to seem like veterinarians don't know what they're talking about.
You mentioned Missouri 340 is what the veterinary is based on, but you have to look beyond that. You're talking about some instances where it's not 340, it's other
Absolutely
parts
right.
that affect the veterinary industry.
Absolutely right. And I won't get all my letters right, but just recently we were looking at something within 340 that cited, I think, 196 or something like that.
Sure.
So then you go back into 196 and figure out, I'll tell you a good example. Actually, reciprocity, which is the ability to get a license in Missouri after you've been in a different state or vice versa.
State reciprocity
Yes.
for licenses. Yes.
In 340, it actually says that you have to have practiced in another state, either this, or this, and one of them is for 5 years consecutive in good standing.
Okay.
And that's still in Chapter 340. But 3-ish years ago, a bill was passed in professional registration, which is a different number, that changed reciprocity to 1 year across all professions that are governed under professional registration. So one of the things we're looking at, going back to do we proactively introduce something, is do we need to clean up Chapter 340 so that it actually says what is the law, because professional registration already trumps it and says that it's only 1 year, not 5.
Okay.
So, yes, there's always nuances of these other things that aren't technically under Chapter 340 in our statute.
And you want to talk about sales tax?
Yeah, that's...
I mean, you mentioned that. What's going on there?
Well, so, right now that's a big hot topic they're looking at, we've already passed in both chambers some capital gains changes, but talking about...
They got rid of capital gains?
Well,
or
how they're... what is and what
Okay.
gets capital gain taxes, what
Okay.
doesn't, stuff like that.
Okay.
But they're looking at changing Missouri income tax. So if Missouri income tax goes away, which was listed as a priority at the beginning of this legislative session,
How do you pay for it?
yeah, money's got to come from somewhere. So then most states that don't have their own statewide income tax have much larger sales tax or property tax or both. So if we increase sales tax, almost invariably, that would increase or put sales tax on services. Mm-hmm. So if your $100 veterinary bill was service-based, now you're 108 or you're 100 and whatever. So from the client standpoint, that looks like, well, I'm spending more at the vet today. From the business owner standpoint, that's where the real, I think, rubber meets the road is the headache, the compliance, the tax bill you're writing, the just the tracking in that, and
Right.
not only within your PIMS, your veterinary software, what you change, but someone in that office still has to deal with figuring out what your tax bill is, and maybe it's now weekly, monthly versus quarterly or whatever. So it definitely could affect our small business owners.
Yeah, no, it's. I've been wondering on how are they going to pay for this if they get rid of income tax, and services is
That's services has got to be the biggest focus. That's
Mm-hmm.
what they would be looking at.
Yeah.
And there are other states that veterinarians pay sales tax on their services,
Mm-hmm.
and so their tax bill is very significant compared
Yeah.
to us that are just paying on product.
they're probably paying monthly or maybe even weekly.
Weekly would not surprise me on some bigger volume.
'Cause you're
clinics.
paying quarterly right now probably on sales tax because it's not much.
Yep.
And then so people don't know sales tax works on the more you have in liability to the state on your sales tax, they're going to make you pay it weekly. Like in a grocery store that I used to run, we obviously had
Yeah.
we sent that in all the time. They wanted that sales tax.
Yeah, and if you don't meet those deadlines, you
get fined.
There's
Yeah,
consequences.
they'll
to
fine
that
you,
too. Yeah.
and if you don't meet it, they'll take away your ability to sell products
Right, exactly.
or services, maybe. So, which is interesting. It's
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt.
No, go
but
ahead.
When we renew our license,
Mm-hmm.
there is a section to verify that we're current on our sales tax.
right. Well, you go to sell your business. If you sell business, you got to say, "Am I caught up? They won't let you sell your business if the sales tax isn't paid." So yeah, they're gonna find you, not fine. They're gonna fine you too, but find you and fine you, I guess, right? Yeah. So no, that's what other nuances are you seeing out there that are, outside, and like so the way they work as 340 dot, there's three numbers after it, or that come out, and in the bills you got it's HB and SB is the way they say
Yes.
the bills,
That's
and
yes,
yeah,
exactly. HB.
got that. What about there resolutions?
Yeah, those are generally topics. They're not necessarily changing a law. It's we, the Senate and the House, think this.
Okay, so it's
So joint resolutions, I mean, they do have legislation tied to them. That's probably a fallacy how I said that, but they tend to be broader topics and not honing in on this one change of language in this bill or this law.
Okay. Do you see anything else out there that's outside 340 that has a impact on the industry?
Yeah, that we're working with currently. Besides the tax ones, that's probably the biggie. There's where my list would have come in handy. A lot of telemedicine things that are being monitored right now. Most of the telemedicine things are not really focused on veterinary medicine, but we're watching all of them. That's a good example that we truly are neutral on those. They're on my list. They're on our radar. We want to make sure they don't all of a sudden change. And the best example how that could change veterinary medicine is state statute says we have to have a valid client-patient relationship. We have to have met. I have to have met you and your animal to be able to prescribe, diagnose, etc. Some of these telemedicines that might, in human medicine, that's not the case. And so we are all very comfortable saying we believe that needs to stay in veterinary medicine.
Good reason for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can talk.
Right, exactly right.
The pet.
My
The only way you get to speak about the pet is I've seen it.
my wife was trying to show her provider her sore throat over the phone, with a camera phone. That's just not reality in veterinary medicine. Okay, so it's a valid, established client-patient relationship is crucial, and so telemedicine has a role in veterinary medicine, but we don't want to circumvent that relationship. Example: other states. Arkansas last year passed an avenue in an emergency to establish a client-patient relationship without the veterinarian in person. And they mandated that if they did these things on an emergency basis, that they have to then see them in person within the next week or 2 weeks, depending on if it's a companion animal or food animal. Well, I think we all see the bump in the road there is that if the problem is solved,
Why are you going to go see the
why
veterinarian?
would you spend money next week to go to the veterinarian?
So who's the onus on then if they don't do that? Is it
We don't know.
the veterinarian or the
Very,
pet
very
owner?
gray in Arkansas.
Okay.
What happens if the animal dies? Well, okay, so you obviously can't examine it next week, but also are they potentially liable for how they treated that remotely? So those are the kinds of things. We also watch what's happening in other states, mostly to see trends and maybe get ahead of it in our own state and what have you.
Colorado was the testing ground for what they did. They found the state that would have the best chance of passing the mid-level practitioner law. So if I hear you right, that neutral's kind of like maybe it doesn't have a whole lot of action going on right out there. We're watching it. It's not probably not going to pass this session. We don't need to be concerned about it. Okay.
It may be something that is either controversial that we just need to sit on. It may be something that it changes all of a sudden and we need to have an opinion. Or it may be something that say this isn't really in our wheelhouse, but we've been asked about it, for example.
Seems like the veterinary medicine has been able to stay out of the fray of the politics, though. That's nice.
The goal. We would really like to be seen as an expert on a topic. We would like to keep the public perception, I guess, that we're trustworthy people with our heads in the right place.
Yeah.
There are dirty things involved in politics. It's just reality, and sometimes we do have to play the game as the association, but for the most part, we avoid that stuff. And I don't know, maybe that's dumb luck, but we usually don't get involved in those little spats or debates or what have you.
I'd be curious. I mean, it's got to be the same percentage of people in the House and Senate that have pets, or even so they already have an affinity for the veterinarian. Yeah. You do. I mean, there's when you have an animal and you're a veterinarian, I always go back to, as a kid, the veterinarian I had, and the veterinarian was the same veterinarian when I came back after school to run the business. Right. And then when we moved to Columbia, I'm like, what do I do? I'm in the veterinary business, right? But I'm like, what do I do now? Yeah, there's this big affinity.
Yes, I think that's part of what allows us to have a good relationship is there's a real connection there. The Senate Pro Tem, we've talked multiple times about her animals. It's not just that we go in and say, hey, here's this bill, and here's what I need you to think about it. We're chatting about, her dog and her horses and those kinds of things.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, they can affect. That's what helps out when it can affect a legislator personally. Yep, that's actually, you talk about the way things work. It's like, what's in it for me? And I can really see this as that. And Dan Brown was, Dr. Dan Brown was a senator. His son
Justin is a senator.
Is there a veterinarian in
Yes.
legislature right now?
Kent Hayden is,
that's right,
is the representative that's a veterinarian. So we've got one veterinarian in the body.
Where's he at in his term?
He was just reelected last year. I think he's got 2 left, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, sophomore term.
Yes.
Okay. So he got a little nicer office this year.
Yeah, moved up.
You know how that works?
He's not a sophomore. This is his, because the House you get 8 years. I think he's in his 6th year.
Okay, so he'll have one more circle.
Yes.
Trip around it. So I
think that's right.
So freshman reps, they don't get the nice, like the floors go up, bigger offices. Of course, senators have,
a little bigger
officers.
A little better view.
Yeah. It's a beautiful Capitol.
Oh, it's absolutely gorgeous.
I mean, the setting is
to go up in the top, and
that's cool.
Kind of climb up in the bones of it, and it's
now that the tarp's gone and it's all
beautiful building
redone and cleaned up. The people haven't been to the Capitol.
It's worth a trip,
and they should watch a legislative session. You can sit in the balcony, watch the Senate, and you understand too, like the way it's neat to see how the sides of the Capitol they're on. I mean, the left and the right, how that even this simple thing. People, you go see it in action. Go to Senate committee. Yeah, go see someone give testimony.
I think it's every 4th grader gets to take the trip, but every adult ought to.
Yeah, for sure. Because 4th graders, might be. It's like you should probably do a couple trips, right? 4th, 8th, and like senior or something. Like just make them go.
Yep.
So the question we always like to ask to wrap these up is,
I lost track of time.
yeah, I know I've been sitting
I
here
was like 11:10.
so
I knew we'd get there.
you're driving home, and you're like, dang it, I wish I would have talked about that.
Oh yeah. Good.
So what is that thing that it's like, man, I wish we could have touched on that today?
Probably going back to the benefit of MVMA. So you'd ask about what other, what other pies do we have our fingers in? Even if you have no involvement, like personally, with organized veterinary medicine, there's not a veterinarian in the state, in my opinion, that shouldn't be involved in their state organization because they do so much for them. It might be behind the scenes. They might not fully see it, appreciate it. If you've listened to this podcast, hopefully you understand that there's a lot going on. Mm-hmm. But that would be if I could look every veterinarian in the eye, and I would tell them it's a tiny investment with a huge return that whether they realize or not could shape their day-to-day lives. Absolutely could affect how they practice veterinary medicine and how they earn a living.
Well said.
What a great way to wrap it up.
The association is important.
Absolutely.
It's important because it goes in the governing of our lives and our pets and everything. So I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
It's great to have you in today. And so I got to close this thing out that if you like the podcast, please like and subscribe. We're all over the place on every audio podcast and, of course, YouTube. So thanks for listening in today. I'm Stephen Hermann.
Kale Flaspohler.
Dr. Cliff Miller, thank you for your time today.
Appreciate it.
Until next time, everybody.